keynote remarks. Thank you for being with us. My name is Joe Salcedo, and I'm a senior partnerships manager with the College and University Partnerships team here at PCC. We're delighted to have you all join us for our 4th annual Equity Institute. Hard to believe this has been going for 4 years now. We thank you. In a moment, we will hear from our esteemed guests and presenters from Elgin Community College. If you are here seeking to understand how to navigate cost reduction and how one college has done this, you are in the right place. We'll be here from 9:20 until 10 a.m. Please note that our presenters have a number of slides that they want to present and information to share with you, but we invite you to also chat your questions and comments throughout the presentation. So again, we'll give it less than a minute as folks trickle in to the space, and then we will officially start. All right, good morning. Again, thank you for being with us. We are here with our first block of concurrent sessions. I'm going to go ahead and briefly introduce our presenters so that they have ample time to share a lot of great information and what they're doing at Elgin Community College. So we are here with our presenters, Tyler O'Donnell and Dr. Tina Ballard from Elgin Community College. Today's session is called Navigating Cost Reduction, a college's pathway to success, challenges, and solutions. We have Tyler O'Donnell, who serves as Associate Dean of Sustainability, Business and Career Technologies, as well as his colleague, Dr. Tina Ballard, who is Associate Professor of English. Thank you both. Excuse me. Thank you, Tyler, and thank you, Dr. Tina, for being with us this morning. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
All right, sharing mine. Can everyone see? Good. All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Again, I'm Tyler O'Donnell, Associate Dean of Business, Sustainability, and Career Tech at ECC. I'm here with Tina Ballard, who's my co-chair for a task force that Elgin Community College initiated to identify possibilities to save money for students when they're buying their textbooks. So we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the initiatives that came from that task force and how we navigated it. I'll turn it over to Tina for the overview slide.
All right, so hi everybody, I'm Tina Ballard. So our task force is actually, we believe, in the 3rd iteration. So way back pre-COVID, if we remember those days, we had started another task force to figure out, like, how can we implement OER? How can we reduce costs for students in textbooks, but also in other course materials? And so that the first group started in fall of 2019, and then COVID hit and the world shut down, including our task force. But then there was another iteration, I guess, that started fall of 2021 that was really charged with gathering data and figuring out, like, what changes can be made. So we, and I was on that one as well, we sent out surveys to faculty and students and took the data and came up with 8 different recommendations that we will talk about later. And so Tyler and I started last fall, was that last fall? As co-chairs on this new iteration. And we're working on implementing these different recommendations. We decided to, our task force included other faculty members and also some administrators, especially from the library and bookstore. But we started with calling stakeholder meetings so that we could really gather input. We didn't want to be like, hey, we're going to do this stuff without really understanding how it was going to impact them. And we recognized that these were some pretty big changes that we were asking people to make. So that's kind of where we started and tried to get everybody on board. And then we've moved forward and we have made quite a few changes and come into some road bumps along the way. So I think that's all, Tyler.
Yeah, so for today's session, learning objectives that we want to kind of address. So we'd like to hear from you as the audience about your perspective on the cost of textbooks, either at your institutions or even if you're, currently, if you have students in school. We would like to examine the impact of rising textbook and material costs and share out some data that was provided to us as part of a participation in a virtual year-long seminar with the American Association of Colleges and Universities regarding OER. So we'll have some data to share out from University of Georgia and some other institutions that kind of show the impact of textbook costs on students. We'd like to provide an overview of kind of what the task force was seeking to accomplish here at Elgin Community College and share out like what succeeded, what we had challenges with and how we solved them. And then compare and contrast OER to inclusive and equitable access models of purchasing textbooks from the lens of a college. So for example, just to kind of prime us for this conversation, OER is very much so on an individual faculty level, like our faculty can decide what textbooks they would like to use in their classroom, whereas like an inclusive and equitable access model would require quite a bit more of a kind of a uniform buy-in from our faculty if we were to implement one of these models, because as a college, you pay for that upfront in some ways. So we have a Slido for us all to participate in. So if you'd like to scan the QR code to input, or you can join at slido.com. How have textbooks and course material costs impacted students at your campus? So if you wouldn't mind to add in some thoughts and feedback. We'll give it another minute or so to get some responses included, and then we can kind of take a look. Yeah, so a lot of great responses here, and I think it's fairly expected. I would argue that these responses are what we were going to receive. We did a little bit of background research with our students here on campus through a student survey that went out as part of the previous iteration of this task force. So we tried to collect some data from our students as far as what their concerns were, right? And we heard a lot of these things. Students were saying it's too expensive. They would struggle. It was a hardship. They were working more hours to afford their books. They would look at, possibly delaying the purchase of their books until they realized if it was, an established value to buy the book, or if they could get by without it, or with sharing, right? So high costs, and just very, it was very apparent to us as an institution, and I'm sure to all of your schools and institutions, that this is a top issue, I think, for our students in terms of affording school. Textbook costs out of pocket can be a real challenge for our students. So thank you all for your responses.
Yes. And yeah, go ahead, Tim. So nationally, we found through our AACNU training that we've been doing, some of these next slides are some data that they have shared with us. So from January 2000 to June of 2022, so thinking when I was in college, end of college, to when my children are starting college, the cost of textbooks increased by 162%, right? And inflation, 74% is high, but that's over double the cost of textbooks, or the inflation rate has gone up. So that's a huge barrier for so many of our students. Can you go to the next slide, Tyler? And then this was another graphic that I found very interesting, right? 64% of the students just don't buy the textbook. And it's not because necessarily they don't want to, but if you have to choose between food and a book, right, you're going to choose food. Well, a quarter of students reported they paid extra hours, but the 11% is probably what made me sad, the saddest. Like 11% of students are skipping meals in order to afford books. And we know that if they're hungry, they're not focusing, they can't learn as effectively. And so it's really proving like what we all know, what we see in our classes every day, right? Like our students cannot be successful if they can't get their materials, but they can't get their materials because of the cost of them.
Yeah, so this slide takes a look at some of the impacts of rising costs based by a race and ethnicity breakdown. So you can kind of see here the first two lines are looking at students who experienced levels of increased stress due to the cost. So you can see the rate at which students reported out that they were stressed out about their textbooks. It's pretty much, 90th percentile here for pretty much, both white and Latinx students who are, seeing this as an issue. The rate at which students reported that they did not buy their textbook on the first day of class due to costs is fairly high here. And this data was not specific to Elgin Community College, just to make that apparent. This was like some national data that was aggregated through the AAC&U and the institute that we participated in as a task force. And then, 20 to 30% of students also reported avoiding taking classes due to textbook costs. And this one kind of stood out to me in a lot of ways because in my career at Elgin Community College, I served in student services for many years as an academic advisor and also in the admissions office for a bit. And, students would ask, like, what can I expect to pay for books if I were to take this class? And some of them even changed their majors, like from health professions, for example, which are notoriously expensive books, and they would avoid taking certain classes just because they thought they couldn't afford it, which is really sad to hear because, it might, shatter someone's dream, it ruins their opportunity to make, to be happy in their pursuit of an education. So, yeah, I think the slide just expands on that. So this is by first generation status. Couple of extra lines here discuss the idea that students did not buy book costs and felt that it later hurt their performance. So you can see that that's towards the bottom there. And then students know that it was going to hurt the performance and still didn't buy it because of the barrier of cost.
So based on the surveys that we did for faculty and students, our task force was charged with implementing 8 specific recommendations. The first one was just establishing this new committee. And for that, right, Tyler and I are co-chairing it. Like I said earlier, we have faculty from different divisions. We have a person in charge of our bookstore. We have the dean from the library who comes to our meetings. And we really work on brainstorming and implementing these different recommendations. So 2 and 3 are probably our biggest road bumps or blocks. So we really wanted to establish this pathway for faculty who want to integrate OER. Like Tyler mentioned, it is completely voluntary. But we wanted to have for people who are interested, hey, here's the path that you can take. And with that, we wanted to create a virtual faculty toolbox that where faculty could go to find different resources, whether they were OER textbooks or other materials that they could use in their classes. Some of the challenges were we found out pretty early that we needed a place for this toolbox to kind of live and for somebody to be in charge of it. And So we started, I don't remember exactly where we started, but one option was maybe the library. Nope, that won't work. So then we were like, well, maybe distance learning. Nope, that didn't work. So then we thought, well, maybe CEDL, which is our faculty development program. And it just kind of kept spinning. So Tyler and I learned pretty quickly from this that it's really important to get upper administration involved, and they were very supportive. It wasn't a matter of a lack of support, but just making sure everybody's on the same page. We also recognized, and this sounds very naive, so forgive me, but I was pretty naive when I started this, the importance of having some sort of budget that can help pay for these types of things. The good news is that, we also, from this, Tyler and I were encouraged to create a new position to hopefully hire somebody that could be in charge of this. Unfortunately, that's not going to come to fruition at this point. However, we did find there's going to be a new home for it. And so our CEDL, our faculty development, is going to take on this role. And we are going to work with them to help hopefully begin training new faculty in the next year.
In the formation of the textbook task force, I think we kind of got somewhat lucky in the very beginning, because going into it, I think Tina and I both had to learn quite a bit about like what is open educational resources, like what goes into the development of them, who do we need in terms of stakeholders. And so it just so happened that we had folks from the library and the bookstore and faculty that had experience using OER that were on the task force. So the process of going through thinking through like who needed to be involved in the conversation, and then also how do we develop these support systems? We were able to write, a PDQ, a job description for somebody to come in and to potentially do this work. The one thing that looking at other institutions and what they do, it was interesting to see, because, people who may have OER in their job designation, there was really no uniformity there across campuses across the country. It was, some of them were housed within a library system, and they were maybe even librarians, like an OER librarian. Others were potentially administrators, some were faculty, and so they were kind of scattered all throughout different divisions, which is flexible. It allowed us to kind of think through like what would be the best home for this position at Elgin Community College. It definitely didn't make it easier that there wasn't, a singular vision for like how this position exists. And, it was very apparent that like this individual, whoever would do this work, needed to have a set of skills and foreknowledge, like about copywriting, about developing materials that we just didn't have as part of the task force. So that's kind of where that position came from. In order to accomplish the goals of recommendation 2 and 3, we needed an expert to come in. And so, as Tina mentioned, hopefully, there will be a continued push for that, whether it be through grant funding or institutionalizing a position moving forward.
So Tim asked if ECC's bookstore is an internal ECC run entity, and thanks, Anthony. Yeah, so it is run by ECC. There's like a person in charge of it. So,
and it's part of our auxiliary system, so there is an expectation of some profit to be given back to the institution. However, kind of started to approach this work at a good time, as the bookstore has even shifted its perspective as a unit that was intending to make a certain amount of money to every year, to really becoming more of a student facing cost saving measure, and adopting methods of saving students money at a much higher rate. So
do you want to continue?
Tina, did you want to take? Sure, I'll do these. So recommendation number 4 was to make textbook materials and costs details available to students sooner. And one way that we were able to do that was kind of in combination with recommendation number 5, was so to create like a web location for textbook and material needs to be housed. So, normally like students would go to the textbook or the bookstore website. They could do a book lookup based on the semester. So the bookstore would handle like uploading all those details. And so there were some conversations in terms of like, well, how do we make it easier for students to navigate to that? Because like, when a student registers for a class, they use our a platform where they have to log in, and they, use their student account, they create their schedule with academic advising, but then they have to remove themselves from that site, go to another tab, look up the bookstore. So nothing was like connected in that way. You know, our internal team here at ECC and in IT and student services was able to build in some connectivity there where students can click, you know, links right where they go and register, which would take them to the textbook landing page so that they can see their costs. And then another step through that was to create like a physical guide for students to read and understand what their options are, because not every student purchases like a physical, you know, textbook. They might have options where they can get an ebook, for example, or, you know, they have some sort of courseware attached to them, or a faculty member might be using OER. So, you know, when they click to see what textbook is required, it'll say, you know, none. So we wanted to create something for students to understand kind of the differences between their books, the pros and cons, you know, what kind of technology they might need if they choose to go with a digital version of a book. And, you know, also we understand that a lot of our students actually use their phones to read their textbooks now. So kind of, you know, addressing that compatibility issue for students to understand what's, you know, what's available to them as far as technology goes. So that was good. And then a part of that kind of stemmed from that was to create like a cost comparison tool, which was great. So within that resource where students can click and then see their textbook costs for the semester and for the course that they're taking, there is an option to click a comparability tool, which would allow them to see kind of, you know, different versions of the book from different vendors. So, you know, whether they buy it on Amazon or, you know, Chegg, or I think there was a handful of different sites that we incorporated into to that tool. So I think that was a big win, because I think students are very savvy when it comes to saving money regarding their textbook purchases. We've heard that quite a bit actually from some of our vendors for equitable access models, which we'll talk about in a few slides. But you know, they reported that students will circumvent going to the bookstore and they'll buy directly from a publisher, you know, in a lot of cases. And that was kind of surprising to me, because, you know, but it just shows you how seriously they take this. You know, it's not just like they're buying it, you know, without investigating other options. So I think it was important to be like transparent and hopefully helpful then, so that students can see how they can potentially save money. I know I would appreciate that as a consumer. And then recommendation 7, which was to kind of just continue surveying our students about the challenges they have in terms of affordability of their course materials. So we worked with our IR team to add a few questions to the annual student survey that goes out from the college. That would incorporate some questions that are kind of directed toward, you know, affordability. And so we hope to, you know, in the next fiscal year, you know, have that data and be able to continue to, you know, use that information from our students directly to fuel kind of future initiatives for cost saving. And then recommendation 8 was to create like a roundup system. So like, for example, if you go and buy a coffee at the cafeteria and you want to round up 50 cents to contribute to like a general fund for students who, you know, might have some like cost barriers. We had explored that, but unfortunately that was one that we quickly found out that, or maybe not so quickly, we had several meetings before we realized we couldn't do it. But there's a law that prohibits, you know, fundraising from public employees at a college. So, you know, and we're still kind of exploring ideas, you know, maybe scholarships and things like that. But Tina, I don't know if you have anything to add to any of these recommendations.
No, I think you covered them all. I might have missed it. I was looking up the chat. So I put the link for the books, the buying guide that we have in the chat, if anybody's interested in it. So I might have missed, but we do have new surveys, questions that are going out to students in the fall. So yeah. And Tyler, looking at the time. So we are curious to know what you guys think as well. So from our like digging into OER, right, we try to list out pros and cons that we can think of, but if you have other ones, please put them in the chat. We're really wanting to hear what you guys have to say. So, right, we know that some pros of OERs is that they're going to reduce costs for students and they can be edited and changed for specific uses. The faculty or the institution who designs it can control that intellectual property. Probably the biggest, at least from the faculty point of view, what I like about it is that students have access to the textbook and materials right away. I don't have to wait the first 2, 3, 4 weeks for them to buy their textbooks. And it's also nice because there are frequent updates. We can revise the OER materials as well to kind of meet. It takes time. Tyler, you want to talk through some of the cons?
Yeah, the time element and the building of like some I guess departments or disciplines have OER resources that are already like very well developed and ready for use. You just kind of, as a faculty member, have to identify what you prefer to use, right? And then you can almost deploy it immediately. But if you're building something from scratch, in terms of assessments and materials, as Tina mentioned, that, I mean, it takes a lot of time. And the way that our institution works in terms of where you have to let the bookstore know if there's any, what you're using, it's like you have to do that pretty far in advance. So for you to be developing a textbook, it's kind of one of those, it's a potentially like a multi-semester, if not year process. So like, how do we establish a payment model for our faculty to, incentivize OER development? Because I think, that it's fairly obvious that work deserves compensation. It's a significant investment in time and expertise. But in addition to that, there's a lot of resources to sift through. Faculty in many cases probably are aware of OER in a lot of ways, but they may not know exactly what all the options are out there. There's the copywriting piece of it. And then, the fact that it does require internet access, could be somewhat of a barrier for some of our students who don't have laptops or even cell phones. So trying to think of, that element of it too, where, you have to incorporate that approach into the OER deployment in your class. So we have a Slido here. So just wanted to kind of gauge some of your thoughts on what you know about inclusive or equitable access models. So these would be like vendors that provide textbooks to, colleges that faculty can adopt. So if you, as a faculty member or your institutions, are using one of these models or have researched them, just to kind of gauge what you know already.
Sorry, I'm trying
Go
to
ahead, Tina.
monitor the chat at the same time. So somebody, Donald asked, how has faculty supported your efforts? I'm having a hard time answering that question. The faculty who know about OER are pretty much on board. There are some concerns about quality and time, but they've been supportive in doing research and being willing, some of them, in implementing those the OER materials. So I think it's something we're still working on, but we're getting the supports in place. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, just looking at the Slido, savings is definitely for sure. I think that we're with the level of buy-in. So, if there's an institutional like threshold that's required, you kind of have to understand where that balance is, where it becomes a value savings. But it does require, faculty to want to use that. But I think we can agree that day one access to materials is always a plus.
So inclusive and equitable access was newer to me. I hadn't heard a lot about it before we started investigating. But the idea is that there's consistent pricing structure, right? Like students for equitable access will pay whatever the cost is for their classes, and then they can kind of plan and prepare for that fee and not go, oh, wait, this Spanish textbook is $200. What? Right.
Yeah, they know that all their books are $50 for every class that they take, or whatever that price point's going to be.
Right. That's nice. The other, I mean, besides having access to them right away, students can use financial aid for it, and that cuts out having to try to find the best price in different places because the financial aid will pay for it. A lot of faculty like the idea that it's integratable with your course management system. We use D2L Brightspace, so students can access it right there. We can send them to the right chapters. But we also know that some students might want to opt out, and for most of the ones that we were looking at, I think that's an option as well.
Yeah, I think the state of Illinois hasn't shifted yet officially, but I think as an institution, we agree that we would do more of them like you have to opt in model. So kind of like all students are addition like in the beginning opted out, so they would have to affirm the choice of consenting to use the equitable access or an inclusive access textbook. So yeah, I guess for the last 8 or 9 minutes, if there's any questions or conversation that we can address, just to quickly comment, I think, for ECC, the kind of approach that we're using right now is that we are continuing to explore inclusive and equitable access models. I think we're going to start possibly with more of an inclusive access model where it's like based on individual instructors who want to use it. We're not using the institutional whole approach right now, but maybe we'll get there at some point. But we wanted to kind of pursue and give the option for inclusive access for faculty to deploy. So kind of like an education campaign soon, and then also, continue to tout OER and the merits of OER. So we're kind of using like a holistic approach. We're not picking one specific pathway and going full bore down that road. We're kind of providing options out there for our faculty to choose and really trying to explain like the benefit analysis of why this is in your best interest to potentially offer it to your students.
Hey, Tyler and Tina, I'm looking at the Q&A and there's a question that says, could you please say more about why you couldn't do the Roundup campaign idea? I know you mentioned that earlier. Was that a federal law that prohibited such a thing, or was it state or local policy?
I don't know if it's a federal law, but I believe it was a state law that says basically our SECA members, it's one of our unions for support staff, work in those different, like the bookstore and the cafeteria, where we would be asking students or faculty or staff, whoever's buying things, to round up and they were not allowed to collect money or ask for donations. And so it was against some sort of law and it was scrapped.
Yeah, offline, I can, take a look too. I know I have an email with the specifics and the specific like policy number as well. So if I can find that later and provide it to Joe or Mercedes, maybe we can share that out in case you would like to look into it further.
And Tyler, I'll just jump. Tyler and Tina, I'll just jump in as well. I think related to that, because we are public entities, that we ourselves are not allowed to engage in fundraising, and that's why we have foundations and other partners in that space, that we are not allowed to use our kind of operational entities for direct fundraising activities.
Thanks, Anthony.
Yeah, thank you. There's 2 other questions in the chat. So Barbara Leach asks, any concerns regarding DOE, Department of Education, conversations on inclusive access?
I think we are still kind of waiting to see what they are going to decide. We know that the state is talking about that. But we're kind of in a waiting.
Yeah, from a course fee standpoint, right? Like we want to be transparent in all things that we do in terms of costs associated to students or assigned to students. So I know we had in some internal conversations about if we were to go with like an inclusive access model to not make the fee a course fee, it would actually be like a separated out like textbook fee that was part of the opt-in process that a student would do. So there would be some sort of a at some point in the admissions enrollment process, they would have somebody that would communicate with them about why they could potentially go with an inclusive access textbook model and opt in to pay their fee. So definitely want to educate our students, not just charge them blindly.
Then we had another question. Mira asked about students with disabilities. Could you speak to how that remained top of mind for you all in thinking about accessibility of your materials?
So we do have a disability support department who can help students navigate, like if they know, I know I have a student this semester who they need their textbooks read to them. And so there's some program that the disability support office can provide to them to have things read. In the conversations that we're having, we are asking, especially for like equitable, inclusive access models, because most of those are available, you know, as ebooks. Is there a print option for students who want them? I think that's an important question to ask. Most said yes, they have to pay a little bit extra for it, but it is an option. So we are aware of it and trying to ask the right questions. I don't know that we have all the answers.
Right. I think that was definitely part of, how you approach the development of OER, whomever that expert would be overseeing that kind of faculty toolbox, and working with the librarians to develop those materials. You would like accessibility would obviously be something that's front of mind when you're creating any sort of text as part of an OER, textbook.
And as far as who covers,
question.
who covers the print costs, I don't think we haven't gone far enough into the inclusive, equitable to make that decision. My assumption is it would probably be added to the student, but don't quote me on that.
I believe that's how most of them are. It would be a upfront cost of the student that they would then order individually if they so chose.
Good questions. Other questions?
So I'm going to go ahead and take this opportunity to thank both Tina and Tyler for your incredible work that you all are spearheading at Elgin Community College. Thank you to everyone who made time this morning. There is a lot to unpack here, but we appreciate a lot of the resources that have been shared, either in the chat. We'll definitely, as a PCC team, be following up with other links and additional responses that come our way. But again, we thank you all. Before this began, we talked with our presenters, and this work specifically falls outside the day-to-day scope of their work, and in addition to teaching and administering policies and practices. So we thank you again. I do want to plug that after this session, there will be a 10-minute pause for all of our attendees, but we invite you to join us back for another round of concurrent sessions that will start at 10 o'clock. 10 minutes after 10 Central Standard Time. So please join us. Please refer to your agenda. Also, if you haven't yet done this, please download Whova. The app is a reliable resource for all things Equity Institute. And I see our colleague Anthony. Do you have a question?
Just a quick comment, Joe. Sorry, I meant to jump in earlier, but just wanted to acknowledge that the conversations that Tina and Tyler are leading across our campus are really infusing across the divisions, faculty conversations about this work and how to start doing it. And there's been really great energy, and it's been part of our structure of our equity and student success action team, action council, to really move things from idea generation into recommendation development and institutionalization. So as a part of our practices, their work will actually sunset into operational departments as a committee. And so really thinking about how do we make these changes structural and part of the campus culture. And so I just wanted to mention that the work they're doing is really spearheading a lot of great conversation across campus. And it's going to be a part of how we do what we do moving forward, which is the goal to not have things live in committee for perpetuity.
Mm-hmm.
Love that. Thank you, Anthony, for
Thanks.
naming that and bringing it back to the whole focus here of making systems level change. So thank you all for being here, and we'll see you in about 10 minutes for the next round of sessions. Have a great day.